Hi all and welcome back to my channel where I cover all things tech, and today we are taking a look at something a little bit different. So far this year we've had a look at some great flagship phones like the iPhone 15 Pro over here and the Motorola Razr, but even the more affordable Razr costs well in excess of $1,000 Australian dollars. So what if you don't have $1,000 to spend on a phone? What if you don't even have half that? What if you only have $300 to spend on a phone? What could you possibly get? Well, you could quite possibly get something like this, the Oppo A58 that costs just $299 Australian dollars. That is nothing at all. There are phone cases that cost this much. So how could it possibly be any good? Well, that's what we are going to discover in this video. If you like tech reviews like this one, then be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. If you've got any questions about this phone, as usual, just comment below and I will try to get to them as quickly as I can. So let's head to the review. Now, Oppo is in a little bit of a weird situation. Sister to the OnePlus brand that's quite famous in the US, it has some quite odd market positioning in Australia at least. So while there are some flagship phones like the Fang series, apart from the Flip N2 and also the Fold N3, none of them have really come to Western markets since the X5 from early last year. There's been no sign of the Find X6 phone, which looks amazing with its 1-inch sensor. So if you're looking for a slab Oppo phone in Australia at least, you are relegated to the mid-range Reno 10 Pro and also the slightly more affordable A98 5G that we looked at earlier this year. So it's a weird mix of budget and ultra premium phones, which is fine, I guess. Last year though, I did take a brief look at the A57s, and honestly, this was one of the worst phones I've ever used. I mean, yes, it is very affordable at around $250 back then, but this is just so mediocre that I just couldn't possibly see anyone using this for an extended amount of time. For example, I'm currently doing a Geekbench 6 test on this phone. I think it's been going for around 10 or 20 minutes and it's done around 18%. While the screen and build quality on this phone was okay, the performance, as we can see here with its Helio G35 processor, well, it honestly feels like something from last century. I'm just going to insert the Geekbench score here because this obviously isn't done yet, and it's dire. I mean, just look at this performance. It is utterly painful. I mean, just look at it scroll through the Play Store. Even that is just so laggy. It's unbelievable. Put it into perspective, single core wise, an iPhone 5 is faster than this thing. So let's hope that the new A58 is somewhat better. And hardware wise at least, we are off to a pretty good start. The build quality is pretty similar to the older phone, the A57, and to be fair, that is no bad thing. Well, I do believe that every part of this phone's body is made of plastic. Nothing here feels especially flimsy. If you do try to bend it especially, you'll notice that there's basically no flex whatsoever. It feels really good. So on the front we can see that it's got a 1080p 6.7-inch display and it looks pretty good. The bezels are quite reasonably sized and there's a tiny bit of forehead on the top with the 8-megapixel selfie camera in a hole punch, as opposed to last year where it was in a little bit of a water droplet style notch. And like with last year as well, we do have a little bit of a chin on the bottom, but it's smaller than last year and is not egregious at all. While we are used to some fairly high resolution screens, even at this price point right now, for example, it is a Retina display. No matter how closely I look, I cannot identify individual pixels. What makes this screen especially impressive though, for the price, are the colors of this LCD, which look really nice and vibrant. And it looks especially good outside because it can reach a peak brightness of 680 nits, which is genuinely more brightness than anybody could possibly need. Even outside in direct sunlight, I remember using this thing and thinking, wow, the screen looks great. Now the colors obviously don't match a more premium LCD panel, yet alone an OLED like, I don't know, on an iPhone 15 Pro Max. The viewing angles especially are a little bit poor if you are used to more expensive displays, but for the price, this is one impressive screen. If we look around the phone as well, we can see that there is a fingerprint sensor / power button combination which works perfectly well. For example, let me just unlock this phone for you. There we go, it works okay. And on the bottom, you can see that we've even got a headphone jack. Now I have to admit, it's been a long while since I've wanted a headphone jack on my phone, but if this is something that you want from a phone, then this surely is the device for you. Down here we also have the USB-C charging port, and it's pretty good to note that it's got a 33 watt fast charging, and the charger does come in the box, which is pretty good. And on the bottom as well, we do have the speaker grills. And just talking about the speakers, wow, the speakers sound really good. Now, I'm not going to say that it sounds anywhere near as good as the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is honestly the best speakers I've ever heard on a phone. The iPhone has way better clarity and bass. So you can hear the difference there. The iPhone has far better clarity and bass, but the volume is surprisingly similar. And I especially love the way that the volume rather, goes all the way up to 300%. Just look at that, that looks insane. I love how fun that is. And let's get to the back of the phone now, and it is, as you expect, all plastic. It's not bad plastic, it's not awful plastic, but it is plastic. It feels okay for this price point. There is a little bit of an unfortunate thing though. Over here it says, innovative AI camera, and let's just say that is a little bit cringe. In addition to that, there's no wireless charging, which is annoying but fine for this price point. What is less than fine though is the insistence that alongside this 50 megapixel camera that we'll get to later, they did waste money on a 2 megapixel mono camera that, from my understanding, does basically nothing at all. I mean, yeah, of course having two cameras looks really good on a spec sheet, especially in this category, but in a category where every single cent counts, it just seems like a little bit of a shame, because that money could have been put aside to other things like the vibrator, because this is one of the worst, one of the weakest vibrators that I've ever felt. And that's just a little bit sad. The Reno 8 Pro that I tested a while back, the N2 Flip, and also the X5 all had fantastic vibrators. Some of the best actually. So to see something so pathetic in a lower inline Oppo phone is really a bit of a shame. Okay, so the hardware is okay, but how is the software? Is it usable? So this runs Oppo's Color OS, and it just mildly annoys me every time. Let me show you why. Because I am just begging them to spell color correctly. They just left the U out, which is very annoying. But that is beside the point. So this is Color OS 13.1, which is based on Android 13, and overall I think that it's quite an attractive skin. It's bright, it's light, it's bubbly, just ignore how laggy that was. And I adore the way that Color OS animates the back animation. I mean, when you swipe back, it does that. It just looks and feels very slick. As you might expect, you can do all of your typical advanced Android features like split screen multitasking. Let's give that a go. So we just press this, split screen, and then we can add another app like, I don't know, the Play Store. Isn't that fantastic? And even better than that, we can then add another floating app. Let's make TikTok float. So as you can see here, while performance is not great, I am literally browsing YouTube, I'm on the App Store, and I'm viewing TikTok all at once, all on a $300 phone. How impressive is that? It's crazy that this all works so seamlessly on a $300 phone. The gestures all work brilliantly too, and there's some genuinely really nice Android additions, like the theme store that we see over here. With the theme store, we can quite easily browse a lot of pre-created skins to help customize your phone, which I really love. There's also the game mode that ekes out every bit of performance from this rather limited processor. But there are problems. Color OS seems to be sort of divided into two camps. You have the premium one that all the expensive phones seem to have. They're all nice and free of bloatware. And then you have the cheap one, like this. Let's go through some of the bloatware, shall we? Not only do we have a duplicate internet browser, like this one over here, And we've also got a duplicate app store with basically no apps in it. I know that this is all rather Samsung-ish as well, but this is still annoying. But the thing is, this is far from the worst that this phone has. But you also have things like the worst, the spammiest games in existence. Let's take a look at some of them. For example, pre-installed, we have Dice Dreams. Like, what on earth could this be? So Dice Dream seems to be this sort of microtransaction filled simulation-ish game? I don't know what to call it, but it seems very poor quality indeed. Let's take a look at another one. We've got Crowd Rush 3D. It's made with Unity. That's how you know it's good. Yeah, they couldn't even pay for premium Unity. Okay, so we've got an ad here. Fantastic. I love pre-installed ads. And gosh, it doesn't even run well. And there we go. We've kind of won, I think. Yeah, we won. Do you know all of those are really spammy games that you see advertised on TikTok? Well, they're all here. It's pretty tragic, but luckily you can uninstall the games if you don't want it, like so. So it really shouldn't be too much of a problem. But how is performance? Well, here is the Geekbench CPU score. As you can see, it's got a single score of just 432 and a multi-core score of 1400. Now the single core especially is very, very poor. I think it's worse than an iPhone 6. I think that's like 600 or something like that. So quite clearly, this is quite similar to an flagship from close to a decade ago. But the thing is, if you ignore those rather meager specifications, it actually feels surprisingly okay. It's got 6 GB of RAM, which is plenty, which means that you can run all of the apps you could possibly want. And while animations on this 60Hz screen aren't the smoothest, it is far from unacceptable. Opening apps can be a little bit slower than what you might be used to, but again, it really isn't all that bad. Let's just scroll through Twitter, for example. While there is a little bit of stutter, it's not too bad. And surprisingly as well, gaming isn't the worst as well. You can play all of your favorite typical games like Subway Surfers without too many issues at all. To be fair though, this game ran perfectly on an iPhone 3G. And did I just see a little bit of a stutter? It's really okay in reality, but despite messages saying that this is not supported, I actually tried out a proper console game from a couple of generations ago, like Grid Autosport, and it actually kind of works. Albeit in the most janky way, but it does kind of work. So as you can see, while performance is not fantastic, it's not alarming at all. The A57, the old phone, to me felt close to unusable quite often, but I could actually see myself using this. It sort of feels like an Android phone from, let's say, 10 years ago. It's okay, but not great. And now let's talk about one of the more impressive parts of this phone, the camera. So this is typically the obvious place to cut costs on a budget phone. I've tested plenty of cameras from cheap phones from the likes of Unihertz and also Oppo's in the past, and typically they are very poor. Not on this though, because it genuinely is not bad at all. So if we open the camera, we can see that the shooting experience is pretty good. The interface is pretty light and snappy. There's not too much lag when going in between these different settings. We can see on the top over here that there are some filters to choose between, like original, R1, and this does remind me of the cool Hasselblad features on some of the more expensive Oppo phones. And if we were to take a picture over here like so, we can see that the results definitely are not too bad, especially if you've got HDR on, and you typically do have to manually do it, sort of like on an iPhone 5, because for some reason it doesn't seem to automatically enable very often. The dynamic range is pretty good and the images are fairly sharp. It's not fantastic in low light, but when it's bright, it honestly looks like a phone from this decade at the very least. The main camera is 50 megapixels, and there is the 2 megapixel mono camera underneath it. You can't seem to use the mono camera by itself, so it must be providing some sort of data about luminescence or whatever. whatever. But as I said before, there's little point to it. The video, on the other hand, unfortunately, is not brilliant. It tops out at 1080p, which is quite poor, and the stabilization is pretty mediocre as well. Even when I'm panning just on a handheld shot, it looks slightly shaky, and it only gets worse when I begin to walk. I'd say it's usable at a pinch, but it looks like a video from a phone taken from 10 years ago. And finally, let's talk about the battery life. And I have to say, it's pretty good. With an entry-level processor and a massive 5000 mAh battery, it was always going to be good. And I found that the battery to be pretty similar to what you find on an iPhone 15 Pro Max. You can pretty much use it as much as you want, and by the end of the day, you still typically have 10 or maybe 20% left. It's very good there. So in conclusion, will I be switching to an Oppo A58? Yeah, probably not. But is it a fantastic phone for the money? Most definitely. I'm honestly pretty astonished by how much they have fitted into a phone that costs so little. It's got a pretty good screen, the battery life's fantastic, and the camera is pretty good as well. If you are buying a first smartphone for a child or elderly family member, or if you just want a second phone, then this is pretty much perfect. If you don't care about having the best of the best as well, then this could serve you okay as well. So overall, well done Oppo. It's a pretty remarkable phone for the price. If you've got any questions, you can ask them below and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Please sub and like if you haven't done so yet. And on that note, toodaloo.